Picture this. The Premier of British Columbia just accused a bunch of Albertans of treason. Not tax evasion, not jaywalking, not even illegally downloading Game of Thrones. Treason. The kind of thing that historically got people thrown in towers or, worse. And the internet absolutely lost its mind. So grab your double and settle in, because we're about to unpack whether David Eby just dropped a legal truth bomb or if he's being a bit dramatic. Spoiler alert, it's complicated, it's wild, and it's so perfectly Canadian that it hurts. David Eby, BC's Premier and apparently part-time legal commentator, decided to spice up a routine First Minister's meeting in Ottawa by casually throwing around the word treason like it's confetti at a Canada Day parade. His target? Members of the Alberta Prosperity Project, a separatist group that sounds like a wellness retreat but is actually dedicated to getting Alberta to break up with Canada. And what heinous crime did these folks commit to earn the treason label? They took a few trips to Washington, D.C. to chat with Trump administration officials. Now, before we go any further, let's just appreciate the absolute chaos of this situation. We've got Alberta separatists sliding into the DMs of American officials at the exact same time that Donald Trump is tweeting about making Canada the 51st state. It's like watching someone flirt with your ex right in front of you while your ex is publicly talking about how much they want to get back together. The optics alone are chef's kiss levels of messy. But here's where things get really interesting. Eby drops the T-word, and immediately legal experts across the country start pulling out dusty law books like they're Indiana Jones searching for ancient artifacts. Because Canada's actual treason law, which dates back to 1893, is about as relevant to modern politics as a flip phone is to TikTok. We're talking about a law that literally mentions killing Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria, people. The woman has been dead for over a century, and yet here we are, still using her name in our legal code like she might pop back any day now. The official treason law sets the bar so high that you basically need to be actively waging war against Canada or trying to assassinate the monarch. Having coffee meetings in Washington? Not exactly on the same level as leading a military invasion. So legally speaking, the experts waved off Eby's accusation faster than you can say constitutional monarchy. But hold on, because just because something isn't technically treason doesn't mean it's not sketchy as all get out. Let's talk about what the Alberta Prosperity Project was actually doing in Washington. According to reports that surfaced late last year, members of this group made 3 separate trips to D.C. in 2025 to meet with unnamed Trump administration officials. 3 trips. That's not a coincidence, folks. That's not accidentally bumping into someone at the grocery store. That's deliberate, planned engagement with a foreign government. And not just any foreign government, but one whose leader has been actively musing about absorbing Canada like we're some kind of geopolitical appetizer. Now, imagine for a second that you're in a relationship, and your partner keeps having secret meetings with someone who's been publicly talking about how much they'd love to date you. Would you be cool with that? Would you think, oh, this is totally fine and normal? Or would you maybe start asking some pointed questions about what exactly is being discussed in these little rendezvous? Because that's essentially what we're dealing with here on a national scale. The timing of all this is what really makes it spicy. We're living in an era where Trump has openly talked about making Canada part of the United States. He's joked about it, he's tweeted about it, he's probably doodled it on maps with a Sharpie. And in this climate, you've got Alberta separatists meeting with his administration. It's like they looked at the room, read it completely wrong, and then decided to hand out invitations to the problem anyway. But here's where we need to pump the brakes for a second and really think about what's legal versus what's ethical versus what's just politically stupid. Canada is a democracy. People are allowed to have opinions about sovereignty and independence. Quebecers have been having this conversation for decades, and last time I checked, nobody was getting hauled off for treason. The Part 1 Québécois ran the province and held referendums, and while it was controversial, it was legal. So the question becomes, where's the line? Meeting with foreign officials when you're a private citizen advocating for political change is murky territory. It's not automatically illegal, but it starts getting really questionable when the foreign government in question has expressed interest in dismantling your country. It's the difference between talking to your friends about your relationship problems and talking to someone who's actively trying to break you and your partner up. Context matters. Legal experts were quick to point out that what the Alberta Prosperity Project is doing probably doesn't meet the definition of treason under Canadian law. But some have suggested it could potentially violate other laws, like those governing foreign influence or even the Logan Act equivalent in Canadian jurisprudence, which prevents unauthorized citizens from negotiating with foreign governments on behalf of the country. Though let's be real, that's also a bit of a stretch because these separatists aren't claiming to represent Canada. They're trying to UN represent it, if that makes sense. What Eby's comments really did was shine a spotlight on a conversation Canada desperately needs to have. Not about the technical definition of treason from the Victorian era, but about what happens when provincial separatist movements start engaging with foreign powers that have their own agendas regarding Canadian sovereignty. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. Trump's comments about Canada haven't been subtle. He's talked about tariffs, about annexation, about Canada being a security threat. And in that environment, Albertans meeting with his administration looks less like legitimate political advocacy and more like playing with fire in a building full of gasoline. Here's an analogy that might help. Imagine you're on a hockey team, and one of your teammates keeps having private practices with the opposing team right before the playoffs. Technically, there's no rule that says they can't. But is it a good look? Does it inspire confidence? Does it make you wonder whose side they're really on? That's what we're dealing with here. The Alberta Prosperity Project would probably argue that they're just exploring their options, that they're representing the will of Albertans who feel alienated from Confederation, and that talking to other governments is part of understanding what independence might look like. And you know what? In a different context, maybe that argument would hold more water. But when the government you're talking to has been actively hostile to Canadian interests and has made jokes about erasing your country from the map, you're not just exploring options anymore. You're giving ammunition to people who don't have Canada's best interests at heart. And let's talk about Alberta for a second. The province has legitimate grievances. The energy sector has been struggling, federal policies often feel disconnected from Western realities, and there's a genuine sense that Alberta doesn't get a fair shake in Confederation. Those are real issues that deserve real conversations. But running to Washington to complain about Canada is like badmouthing your family to strangers who've made it clear they want to buy your house and kick your family out. It's not strategic. It's self-defeating. The problem with Eby calling this treason is that it actually lets the separatists off the hook in some ways. Because now the conversation becomes about whether he used the right legal term instead of about whether what they're doing is wise, ethical, or in Alberta's actual best interests. It's a distraction. The separatists get to play victim, claiming they're being persecuted for their political views, when the real issue is that they're potentially being used as pawns in a larger American game. So is David Eby right? Technically, legally, by the definition laid out in an 1893 law that mentions a monarch who died before the invention of the airplane? No. But is there something deeply problematic about Canadian separatists meeting with an administration that has expansionist designs on Canada? Absolutely. Sometimes being technically correct isn't the same as being wrong about the bigger picture. What this whole situation reveals is that Canada is entering uncharted waters. We've dealt with separatism before, but always in a context where sovereignty meant becoming an independent nation, not potentially being absorbed by another country. The Quebec sovereignty movement never involved meetings with foreign powers eager to carve up Canada. This is different. This is new. And we don't really have a playbook for it. At the end of the day, whether you call it treason or just really bad judgment, the Alberta Prosperity Project's DC field trips represent a challenge to Canadian unity that goes beyond provincial politics. They're engaging with a foreign government at a time when that government sees Canada as a potential acquisition. And if that doesn't concern you, regardless of how you feel about Alberta or separatism or federal politics, then you might want to check your pulse. So here's the takeaway. David Eby maybe shouldn't have reached for the treason card without a legal degree and a time machine back to 1893, but is not wrong to be sounding the alarm. What Alberta separatists are doing might not be illegal, but it's dangerous. It's playing into the hands of people who don't care about Alberta's prosperity or sovereignty, only about American interests. And that should worry all of us. If this deep dive into Canadian political drama got your brain firing, hit that subscribe button and join the Canadian Insights family, because we're covering the wildest political stories coming out of this country every single day. Drop a comment and let me know, is Eby out of line or is he onto something? Should we be more worried about separatists meeting with foreign governments? And what the heck do we do with laws from 1893 that mention dead queens? Smash that like button if you made it this far, and turn on notifications so you never miss when we break down the next political mess. Because trust me, in Canadian politics right now, there's always a next mess. Catch you in the next one.